The conceit that you find, and that gets really to the definition of stupidity in the use of the term in the book. It's a conceit, it's a self-important ignorance. It's a sense that your boss is your boss because either he's the cousin of the owner or he thinks he's important because he's the boss. But in either case, he's not going to concede that he doesn't know what he's doing and listen to you. On the other hand, he's not going to concede that he doesn't know what he's doing and not listen to you. In no way does he want to be corrected and redirected. So how do you talk to somebody like that? It's very difficult to back up. You sit across from an employee, as I've done, and you sit there truly stunned, thinking to yourself, where do they make these people? And you just listen to these person trying to explain their concept, and you don't know, again, you don't know where to start. So I started in the first chapter with Plato, and I recognized that the first chapter, and I kind of talked you through the first chapter, is that you have to keep going. You can't play Chopin nocturnes unless you learn the scales, and you can't do puzzles unless you kind of take one piece at a time. And it's not the most exciting start to a book. But it's short. The section from Plato on basic definitions and how you might structure one is very short. But you need to start thinking in those terms. You need to start thinking in more fundamentally structuring your thoughts. We have a couple people here who study mathematics. So probably the simplest deductive reasoning that you come across is some simple Euclidean, in this case not proofs, but propositions. And so you learn in, say, the real world, it's a conceptual world, but you learn the definitions of the geometric shapes, and you apply them with axioms, with the common agreed principles, and you build something. I take you one step further into a little bit more complex area, which is Spinoza's proof of God, which sounds pretty heavy. He does it in 11 steps. It's pretty fast because it's not his point in the book that he wrote. But it's the same, it's the Euclidean approach. It is axioms and definitions and moving step by step by step. Now, if you think about how we apply it in the real world, it might be beneficial to actually think of God as the next Apple product. You know, what is it I want to create and what's it based on? The definition of a watch, of timekeeping, of what people use and the colors, and you structure it. That's product planning. And so the basic rudimentary steps of chapter 1 walk you through some of that. Now chapter 2, I take you into a very simple discussion about the basic principles, foundational principles of business, of cultural interaction, of social structure. Because a business is nothing but a collection of people working together. And if you are going to have a business, or you're going to be part of a business, then you need to have some understanding as to why you're in business. Even the concept of business, is fundamentally a simple definition, if you will, of a commercial transaction with some imputed value in what's getting transacted. That's about it. You can take it from there and create anything you want. The fundamental ideas then of the history of philosophy of sort of social and Adam Smith and Mandeville's bees, and kind of walk you through some things to consider. It's not a textbook. It's not something for you to memorize. It doesn't matter if you remember any of these names. And they're all concepts that you've heard or thought or seen elsewhere. But again, it's just to get you thinking about these things in a fresh way. The third chapter is trying to apply some of these concepts in the real world. And the way you typically see these concepts are in concrete cases, in concrete, if you will, businesses or situations. Not really different, as I say in the book, it's not really different whether you have a case study about a company who's trying to resolve some issues, that's losing money, that's trying to come up. Not much difference between that and sitting in a bar with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or not your boyfriend or girlfriend, but a boyfriend or girlfriend who's having trouble with their relationship. you're asking the same questions. You're asking, what do you want, and who are you, and where do you want to go, and what's the problem? And it's the same thing. What kind of company are you? What's your plan? What are your competitors? What's the future look like? How are you going to project forward? What's your strategy? It's all the same. It is no more, and this is what I try to remind you, it is no more complicated than just asking yourself, who am I, where am I, and where do I want to go? It's the same in business. It gets very complicated. We make it very complicated because we get paid lots of money to make it complicated. And then we add on things, and we add more things, and we make conglomerates, and we do lots of things. But at heart, in essence, it's a very simple process. Chapter 4, I do turn to writing. And I really questioned in the beginning as to whether to get into writing in this book, but the fact is you can't go through any kind of rational process or attempt to go through a rational process and not write it down. Because until you write it down, I don't know about you, but in about 2 minutes of taking a shower, I can solve the world's problems. It just all makes sense. And you jump out in the shower and you write it, and you realize you've got 4 sentences that don't quite go together, and they certainly don't take into account everything that needs to be considered. So you need to write it down, and you need to be structured. You can't have a rational plan. You can't have a well-considered, or you can't consider whether it's a well-considered thought unless you see it in writing. You just can't do it. And writing is one of the biggest challenges that I would say virtually everybody faces. Thinking is easier in some ways, mainly because we don't test it. Once you write it down, you're testing it and you realize your thinking may not be so great, but you usually blame your writing as opposed to your thinking. And so you need lessons in writing. And trust me, with all the students and reporters, and even editors, you just inconceivable what people are capable of writing or not writing. So I spent a bit more time on writing than I had initially planned because I realized as I picked it apart that the different components of writing required that I really take a certain structure and approach, and so there are a lot of sections, and that's the chapter that has more exercises. It's kind of a little bit of a journalism class, and there's some exercises in there, but again, hopefully you'll be able to sit back and just play them through and see how they work out. Chapter 5 is taking all this, taking the fundamentals, taking the business that you've created, taking the situation and the case study and how you write it down, and looking at your strategy. Now, I've not found enough companies in Romania who actually have a written strategy. It's very strange. The response I get a lot of times is, yeah, but things will change in the next 3 years. And you say, yes, of course they will, but you have to write a strategy. You will change it, but you have to have something structured. The IT folks I work with, they have this theory of just throw it out there and then see what works and then adapt it and kind of change it and then bring it back and then change it again. And you can do that. But as I say, that's kind of what Thomas Edison did. He spent years developing things, trial and error. And there's a whole different approach, which is actually sitting back and thinking, what is it we want and why do we want it, and let's build it and kind of get it right the first time or get close. I don't think the Apple Watch, they can launch that and then see what everybody thinks and what you like and what you don't like, go back and redo it, and then try it again. It just doesn't work very well. So having a strategy. Now, the great thing about strategies is that, Harvard Business Review and just about every publication, their livelihood is strategy, is writing about strategy and management. And when you actually look at what's being picked apart in terms of strategy and the components behind the strategy, I got to tell you, it's all the same thing. It's really all the same thing. It's what's your company, where does it want to go, and where is it right now? And the mind-boggling meetings I've been in when you've tried to use either the steeple or the SWOT or Porter's 5 forces or whatever else, it's like talking to kindergarten children. If they don't understand what it is that's being done, having boxes doesn't help. So the fundamental underlying coherence within any strategy really doesn't matter what acronyms you come up with. Now, the last chapter is about game theory, and I just touch on it because you could spend, people have spent books and books and books on game theory. But it's essentially that when you do a strategy, you do that strategy internally, and you look at competition, and you do all that, sure. But you don't actually play out what happens when you launch your new strategy, what all the competitors do, and then how you respond to them. But they're anticipating that you're going to change based on what they do, and then you have to anticipate their changes. And it's, it's Napoleon. I mean, it's basically war games. And there's some, there are a lot of fun games to play in game strategy or game theory, and there are a lot of kind of surprising results that you can come up with if you actually walk through it. So mainly I wanted you to know about the game theory. I wanted you to be exposed to it a little bit. It's very fast. And then the conclusions. Hang on one second. The challenge was that I've read or looked through dozens of critical thinking books, and they're just awful, truly. I mean, they're fine if you're in college and you need to take tests, but they are dry and they are definitional. And the last thing I wanted to do was get into the definition and test you on deductive and inductive and abductive reasoning and take you back to my university days where you take sentences and put them into symbolic logics and formal language, and then you make mathematical, and you do syllogisms. You'll kill yourself if you have to do that. And even if it's fun as a game, as a mathematical exercise, I challenge you to go back to the office and turn something into a mathematical formula and subtract it from the one above, and you'll come to the logical conclusion. It's not applicable. It just doesn't help. If I know that I'm doing something inductively, if I'm inferring something from something else, yet I'm not doing it deductively, it really doesn't help, to put up on the chalkboard which method I'm about to use. Because a lot of this stuff is intuitive, is innate. It's the training of the brain to walk you through that is the most important. So listen, basically all I really wanted to get to was the fact that what the book is attempting to do is put you on a long plane ride. It's great if you're flying transatlantic round trip. And you put your feet up and you read it and you think about it and you just see how it considers what you're doing and what you need to do. And in the months and the years ahead, hopefully you'll think back to at least something you read in there. And it'll prompt you to consider or to question or to reconsider what you think you know that maybe you don't really know. I'll give you one example of one of my favorites in the books, really fast. The worst banking crisis in the U.S. recently, since the Great Depression, was in 1989, 1990. This last financial crisis was devastating for economies, but not for the banks. In 89, 1990, 91, in the Mid-Atlantic region, and after the savings and loan crisis, there were 1,000 banks in the U.S. that failed, with more than 1,000 in 3 years. And that was like 1 out of 14 banks. It was every Friday night. I'd just sit in the newsroom and wait for the fax machine to come from the federal regulators as to which bank locally was being closed, and it was clockwork. So imagine 3 of the biggest banks in Romania being closed. The report comes out on Friday night, and then Monday morning you go to your bank, your money's there, it's just a new bank, or some other bank is taking it over. So you get used to it. Well, I was interviewing this bank chairman who, long story, but basically owned a bank in Baltimore, had been merging, took over another bank that was about to fail, and I asked him how does he expect to save what was the region's biggest bank at the time, covered 3-4 states around Washington, D.C. And he looked at me in this, this kind of brilliant moment, or for me anyway, a brilliant moment of recognition of what life and what business is about. And he said, Peter, banks are like airplanes. They're made to fly. They're made to fly. You push a wind across a wing, it goes up. He said banks lend out money up here, borrow money here, and if you can't make a profit, you're an idiot. And he proceeded to explain that what he needed to do was simply go back to what banking is. You lend money here, and you borrow it down here, and the difference is what you use. The problem, and this is 1991, or 1990 maybe, is way before derivatives got started. The problem, he said, was all the crap that bankers like to do around the edges. All the different ways they like to make a little more money and slice off something here and then use the bank's money to invest there. And because they are not, and this was our discussion, it was kind of off the record, had no place in the article. This wasn't a philosophy discussion in the newspaper. But the whole point was that the question as to whether a bank is, in essence, to protect wealth, or in essence to create wealth, is the ultimate question in banking. Because, as you will have everybody say to you, if you say, well, do you want, vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? Well, I want both. Yeah, okay. Well, bank holding companies want to make money and they want to protect money, but you can't do both. You can't put one of those, or you have to put one of those in front of the other. And that's what his point was. The investors in his bank had accepted that it was failing, so he didn't have to worry about making money for them. He simply had to get the bank to survive. So it was all about protecting wealth, and if he built it like an airplane, it would survive. And it did. It got bought by Citibank later, and everything went to hell. But at the time, it survived. And that's the kind of, I won't say simplistic. It's not simple to arrive at that point of understanding, but once you get there, you realize just how simple things, your girlfriend's problems with her boyfriend, just how simple that is, how simple business can be, and we just complicate it.